So first off, welcome to everybody who's listening in or who will be listening in since this session is being recorded. My name's Andrew. I am a developer advocate at DEVCYCLE, but not really anything today except for the kind of co-host to learn a little bit about the experience of some of the other DevCycle team members who kind of took my place as the resident conference traveler of the past couple months and decided to all go to the same city together for a couple of great conferences. So I think I've got all the people set up as speakers right now. So maybe Jonathan, Andrew, Anthony, you just want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to folks that are going to be listening in to this recording or who kind of jump in as we go.
I can go first.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, quick intro. Jonathan Norris. I'm one of the co-founders, CTO over here at DevCycle. And yeah, happy to chat about my experience at sort of the LeadingEng conference last week.
Andrew Norris, who, yes, I am Jonathan's brother, co-founder and CEO. I was at the SaaS Open conference in New York last week.
Great. And last but not least, myself, Anthony, account manager here at DevCycle, and I attended the LeadDev conference in New York last week.
Amazing. So, Chris, since you're kind of like leading as our listener right now, I'll say this, and I'll say it as kind of more people pop into the space as kind of things keep going. If you want to jump in, ask any questions, of course, just request to speak, and I'll gladly add you into our list of speakers. Oh, there we go. Now we got a few people that are showing up here. So welcome to those who are just arriving. Welcome to our space. We're chatting New York City. We're chatting tech conferences. So if you've got questions kind of as we are going through, Jonathan, Andrew, and Anthony are going to be the people that you can ask. And so just request to speak. We'd love to have you on and just kind of talk about things. I know Richard, who's here, is actually based in New York City. Well, technically in New Jersey, but it's close enough to New York that I would consider it New York. So Richard, maybe you got some questions about these, but I guess maybe kick things off with a little bit of background on each of these conferences. And I don't want to give like the website definition of it, because I feel like anybody can Google these conferences and like find out what they're all about. So I'd be super curious, and maybe start with Anthony, because you were at LeadDev. Sort of what was LeadDev all about? Like, who was it for? What was kind of the focus of the conference? Yeah, just like a little bit about what LeadDev was all about.
Yeah, for sure. So what I noticed is that there were a lot of sort of senior devs trying to make the transition to more of like either like a director role or any sort of role where they would start to sort of manage their own team. They were there just to sort of network with people that are already in those types of roles and sort of learn not just how to manage a team, but just what are some of the technologies that are emerging to help them manage teams a little bit more efficiently, just given how things are sort of changing in the market, and what technologies they need to have on their radar.
Love that. Okay. What about SaaS Open? I feel like SaaS Open seems as though it should be fairly self-explanatory, but Andrew, I'm curious, like, was it about open source SaaS platforms? What was it all about?
Yeah, actually not open source related. So SaaS Open is basically a CEO or founder forum. I think they have 2 locations. They do Austin and New York, run by Nathan Latka, who's the I guess CEO and co-founder of Founder Path, which helps. Basically, it's a funding platform for founders who don't want to take dilution on their ownership through very low sort of restriction debt offerings that they provide. So Nathan's created sort of, is a book out and does lots of podcasts and sort of is seen as like a collector of what it means to be a great SaaS company in this day and age, and sort of as things evolve. So he's gathered sort of like 10 million plus ARR founders together to give talks, share about sort of like what are the latest growth techniques, fundraising trends, how to structure revenue teams, how to scale businesses, and so it's not open source specific. It's a pretty wide category of events, and it was my first time attending, and happy to talk more about it. But that's sort of like the high level of what it's all about.
Love it. All right, so that means, Jonathan, last but certainly not least, LeadingEng. It was sort of a one day conference to end things off. What was it all about?
Yeah, it was kind of, from what I understand, it was kind of like an extension off the Leading Dev conference, and more for, I guess, engineering managers or already managers or executives or co-founders of companies. And so it was very much more of like an interactive session-based conference where you were in sort of like a large room, and there was some sort of interactive talks where you got to sort of deep dive into how your business operates, how you can affect and improve your business through like the things that you can control as an engineering leader, right? So really trying to think deeply about like how do I, as running this engineering team, affect the business outcomes of the business, and like what are the things that maybe I'm not thinking about that I should think about. And there's kind of like everything from like there's a workbook that they give you, and you sort of work with folks at your table to sort of answer some of these existential questions about your business and how things are going, and maybe how you can impact the business. So it was really interesting from that point of view. And I think a big core part of it too was to try to put sort of like-minded executives and founders together at the table, so that you had sort of like a group of people who are in a similar sort of position or situation as you are as a leader, and you could sort of talk open and honestly about the challenges you're facing and approaches to improve them.
Interesting. So I feel like this was like, we kind of did like if you could look at this in developer terms, I feel like this was like a full stack conference, like spread over 3 different places. Very cool. So so one of the things that I think is really unique here is that, is my audio working? I can't actually tell.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It is. Oh, weird. There we go. Oh man, Twitter Spaces, X Spaces on desktop is not bueno. So one of the things we did differently about this is we were not exhibiting. So DEVCYCLE has exhibited at lots of conferences before. We've been around the world speaking at conferences, and this time we were just kind of going as conference attendees. And so I'm super curious from whoever kind of wants to jump in and answer, like, how did you find the experience just going and like not necessarily having any responsibilities aside from just kind of taking advantage of what the conference had to offer?
I can probably speak to this first. So the thing that I like the most, that was a little different from how we've sort of approached conferences in the past, the fact that since we didn't have a booth to sort of man, it made us made me at least a lot more mobile. Not having to constantly, I say it like it's something you don't enjoy, but when people come to your booth, you can get a little bit overwhelmed, and you're managing like multiple conversations, and you see someone waiting to talk to you, and then you have to sort of wrap up the conversation that you're currently in to make sure that they don't leave. But this one, you were really able to, like, if you're having a really good conversation with folks, you weren't like pressured to end the conversation, and people seem a lot more open to chat with you when you don't have a booth, because you're more of like a peer rather than someone trying to like push a product on them or something like that. So
I like that. Andrew, Jonathan, any thoughts there?
This was definitely a learning experience type conference. The sessions were thick and fast. There was, sort of the evening events were sort of the opportunity to unwind and chat and get to know other founders. but there was a lot of programming set up. So from that perspective, learned a lot. Lunch was a good opportunity to sit down. They did something interesting, which I hadn't seen at one of these conferences before, where they had a different sort of discussion theme for each lunch table. So you could pick like, hey, are you interested in learning about fundraising or venture debt or growth strategies or sales strategies or whatever it might be. And so that was a good opportunity to sort of like, you know, uh, find the sort of audience, find the sort of like-minded folks in and amongst a bunch of strangers. So I thought that was interesting. And yeah, as fellow founders, you've a lot in common in terms of like things that you're facing and challenges. And yeah, I did actually give one talk about pivoting our business from being more of a marketing and product focused platform in Taplytics to clearly a dev focused platform in DEVCYCLE, which was a cool experience where they did it just sort of like as a flexible coffee talk. And what was interesting with the format of this conference was SaaS Open was you were able to actually submit ahead of time what you would be interested in hosting a chat about. And sort of the more people that sign up for it, the sort of like higher up the stages of presentation you would get. So, I did the first one that I done here at the first conference, and then I can give a more broad talk with slides and data and stuff at the next one. So I thought that was an interesting experience.
Yeah. And Jonathan, I'm curious about yours, but because I know yours was obviously a different format, but for Chris and Richard, because I know you both are that conference alumni, so very similar with what Andrew had was talking about to like open spaces, but instead of doing it when you arrive at the event, there was actually the ability to kind of build out a pitch, like a really simple like conference talk pitch before. Which I thought was really nice. And then people could like search through it and like you could put tags on it and people could register to attend, which I thought was like a very interesting take on still having like an unconference model, but giving a little bit more structure around it, I thought was super, super interesting. So Jonathan, I mean, maybe the different question for you then is, so this was a different format of a conference altogether. So like how was it kind of being in this like way more structured conference format?
Yeah, it's definitely different. Like most conferences I've gone to are kind of like the bigger ones where it's kind of a choose your own adventure, like figure out what talks you want to go and see and maybe line up like an hour ahead to every event to try to get into a talk. Where this was very much a very structured program where like some of the titles of the things were like honing sort of your commercial awareness and driving business outcomes was kind of one of the talk, and it was very much a like half of it is a talk, and then they sort of go into a structured setting where they're making you ask questions, like they're making you sort of ask questions of yourselves and your business, and sort of talk through those questions in a group setting. Some of the other like talks that were given were like defining your technical strategy and like crafting the clarity and direction for your team. And there was a really good talk about sort of driving pace and sort of delivering on high impact projects. And like these are all folks from like GitHub and Datadog and Netflix. And I think one was the new CTO of, I forget where she was from, but yeah, she had previously been at, I think, GitHub as like a high-end executive there. So lots of like really high-end executives that you got to talk to, but they also sort of led you through sort of a strategy session for your business, which was pretty interesting. And then yeah, it sort of dove into some table discussions, but the challenge is when you only have like 10 minutes for a table discussion with like 8 people around the table, it's kind of hard to sort of have a deep conversation. And so a lot of the times, a lot of those conversations kind of spilled out into a lot of the break time and stuff like that, to try to like continue a lot of those interesting discussions.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, these like the more structure you have, and then it's so limited of what you can actually do in sort of those smaller periods of time. Yeah, it's super, super fascinating. So, so I'm assuming, oh, I mean, I know the answer to this, so I'm kind of like posing this question that I already know the answer to. None of you had been to any of these conferences in New York before. So, like, what was it? And again, I know this answer. And so if you're watching, like, yes, this is kind of like, I knew what we were going to talk about, but I want other people to say it. Why did we end up choosing these 3 conferences? Like, I genuinely actually can't even really remember like what it was about these conferences that looked so attractive.
I can go first. So one, I've been invited to SaaS Open previous years, but we're unable to make it. I think to the Austin one before. New York is just, DevCycle's headquartered in Toronto, so the New York flight's a fairly easy and quick one to do. We also have a lot of customers in the New York area, which I was able to meet with. So just both like sharing our story at DevCycle, what we do, finding tools from other SaaS founders that could be helpful, from everything from like billing platforms to different tech that we could use as part of our stack. That was sort of an interesting opportunity for us. And yeah, that was sort of the instigation for me. One, of Nathan just bugging me about finally attending, and 2, being in a room with other founders that both can find new things that could be valuable to our business, and also share what DevCycle could do, because we can help a lot of those companies as well.
Love that. Anthony, you unmuted there for a second too. And by the way, as people are unmuting, like Chris, Richard, anybody else is listening, like feel free, come on, speak if you want to ask a question or just want to provide feedback or just want to be part of the conversation. But Anthony, thoughts?
Yeah, like I think one of the reasons we focused on lead dev was because these are the types of people that make decisions on the type of solutions they want to implement in their software development process, and Feature Flags falls into that. The other reason was on one of the days, actually, there was a talk focused solely around the state of feature management and experimentation. And that's basically what our platform does. So it was really, really cool. A lot of insights gained from attending that talk specifically on where the market's at. Yeah, so it seemed like a no-brainer.
Love that. And then I think, like, I mean, Jonathan, you could speak to this as well, but I think like LeadingEng was super interesting because it was like very specifically focused to like engineering leadership, which I think is, you don't have a huge number of conferences that are there, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think the quality of the attendees and just like, it wasn't a super large group. I think about 200 folks or so, maybe a bit more. But yeah, I think the quality of kind of like the folks you got to meet and the speakers was kind of the main attraction for this event, and it being kind of only a one-day event that's easy to fly in and out for, is helpful too. And being in Toronto, being close, you can get down to New York pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so go ahead, Anthony.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I did notice that was different from this conference, I was excited to add to the excitement of going, was the fact that this is the first one I've ever been to where they actually allowed you to schedule like one-on-ones with some of the speakers. As you can imagine, these are people that are very, very hard to get a hold of after their talk. Everybody kind of wants to like, crowd around them. But yeah, LeadDev offered like a very, very easy like portal to like book times to chat with these people about not just about the talk they gave, but if you just wanted like to get their insight on things that meant something to you, they were like very open to chatting.
Love that. All right, we got some people requesting to speak. Yeah, Richard, what do you got? Welcome, Richard. So Richard, again, sort of met Richard through that conference, which is a technical writer, and is pretty fantastic, joining in on a lot of our streams recently. So Richard, take it away. What would you like to ask, or questions or comments or feedback?
Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Richard, like Andrew said. And the question I had for everyone speaking is, what did you feel like, or how did you navigate balancing between networking and going to the talks? Because I definitely found when I was attending that conference, because it was multi-track, so it was pretty difficult to balance between wanting to talk to people and wanting to go to my friends' talk and supporting them. So a really good example of this was that actually Andrew and PJ's talk was the exact same time as Jason Torres's talk. And I was like, oh my God, I want to support both of them. I want to go to both talks, but I can't be at two places at once. So I had to go run up to Andrew and just like, hey, I want to support you. I just want to let you know, I'm just going to Jason's talk today. So just was curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I can definitely speak to this because in our conference, everything, all the talks are basically happening in one room. It seemed to take up, 95% of everybody at the conference. So it's a little bit hard to have conversations that way. But there were obviously some break periods and lunch periods to chat with people. Yeah, it's very hard. I experienced that too, Richard. I'm glad you brought that up. My sort of way of combating it is just try to find like a group to sit with before before the talks even happen, and just quick introduction to yourself, and just try to sit with people as talks are going, and have like small talk if you can, just to take advantage, because otherwise you lose out on so much time with all the talks that are taken up in that big room. And so yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Sure. The big thing I learned, especially with like these one-day conferences, was that to get there early and like try to do a lot of the mingling really early in the day, because like obviously the rest of the conference was pretty well packed time-wise. So I found I made the most connections like right at the start of the day, and I was I tried to get there a bit early to get to meet as many people as possible.
Yeah, I was ambitious and booked like coffee morning meetings with a bunch of customers both days. So I definitely failed at that strategy, but I definitely will make sure not to do that next time. The most of the talks at SaaS Open either were like everything's on the main stage and then you can leave and go into a networking area and chat with folks there. Where you did have to make a choice. They had like 3 different tracks effectively of like separate smaller talk rooms. So you sort of picked, do you want to do sales? Do you want to do growth approaches or marketing? And pick that track, and you have to sort of choose that one. There's definitely talks that I wanted to do both. So I found that person afterwards because everyone was just sort of mingling around afterwards, and introduce myself and had a good chat that way. But yeah, going in with a little bit of a plan of like, especially if there's some degree of like information given about, both the speakers. We were lucky enough for SaaS Open to also know sort of who had signed up for which.
Oh,
just trying to call me.
There we go.
I think I'm back. So yeah, partway. So sort of having a bit of a game plan of like, here's the like 10 people that I know I want to find and run into, and what their talks are. Having a bit of a game plan ahead of time was helpful, but that's just sort of my over planning nature of how I do these things.
Yeah. So Richard, yeah, go ahead. Chris, welcome as well. So Chris is joining us as a speaker now as well. And so like Richard, Chris, like kind of go ahead. Chris, again, that conference alumni is a web design and UX UI consultant. So yeah, I don't know, Richard, you got your hand up. Maybe you can go first, and then we can let Chris on. But totally up to you guys.
Yeah, I definitely agree that going early was a huge benefit for me, because like it was my first time traveling and going on an airplane for the first time. So I was honestly super nervous. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go in early, and I got so early that like they were still setting up and like no one was there. And I think that time allowed me to mingle with anyone who came in early. So I was able to have that time to talk with Shashi and Chris and Ellie, and I actually got to know Chevy and Eddie through that experience because they were so early as well. And I think that because I was able to go that early, I was able to experience like that just slow, intimate in nature of getting to know people before slowly diving into the more workshop heavy, talk heavy conference nature of it all.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. Chris, go ahead, man. Welcome to the stage.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I was at that conference as well. First of all, where is this at? I see it's in New York, but like, is it like what part of New York?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, where were these conferences, guys?
Yeah, I'll start. SaaS conference, the SaaS Open was actually at the Liberty Streets complex, or just near the World Trade Center. And they have this space that was basically just empty office space. I think it was actually like the Hearst Media floor space before. They turned into something called Convene. Anyways, it was great. It had like one room with a big stage, 3 like large like presentation rooms, and like a dining area downstairs. Anyways, it was right in sort of the downtown core near Wall Street in the financial district.
Awesome. Yeah, I see where that one's at. Very cool.
Yeah, both of the other ones were up at the Javits Center, kind of the Javits North complex. If you've ever been there, I've been there once before for Datadog's conference. Kind of like on the north end, they have like it's like a newer, I think, part of the Javits Center that's more sort of like tailored to these type of conferences with a bunch of like breakout halls, stuff like that.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah, I'm looking for just what my next conferences are going to be in 2025.
Yeah, so I mean, that's maybe a good question. So obviously we're talking New York City conferences and LeadDev and SaaS Open and LeadingEng, you get an idea there. But like, are there other conferences that anybody that's here has been to either in New York or just like universal conferences that you found to be like really, really good ones to go, especially if you're looking to engage with like a really active developer community?
I'll go. I actually really liked last year. There was a WordCamp, that's primarily for WordPress users. I actually thought that was really beneficial. I met a lot of cool people. They're having it this year, but I'm not going to make it because I've just done so many conferences. And I usually pay out of pocket because I don't have like a company that pays, which is fine. I pay out of pocket to go to these. It's like a lot to go. After you go like 3 or 4, you're like, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew?
Yeah, we did KubeCon EU earlier this year. I guess KubeCon NA in Chicago last fall, both of which were huge, tons of interesting talks. We had a booth at both, so I think our experience is a bit skewed, but Andrew and I are actually going to SquiggleConf, web dev conference in Boston in a couple weeks. And yeah, there's a bunch of other ones that we've planned for later this year. I know, Jonathan, you went to the Datadog conference this year.
Yeah, Datadog conference was pretty solid in sort of that same space. Not as big as like KubeCon, or I went to reInvent last year as well, which was nuts. Everyone should experience reInvent once, but I'm not sure many people are excited to go back. It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. What about you, Anthony? I mean, because I know, Anthony, you've been in the tech scene for a long time, in different kind of worlds in engineering, but any big tech conferences that you've been to that have been like very, very impactful?
The tech conferences that I went to back when I was doing my startup was more geared towards like construction engineering tech conferences. So we're not the same type of vibe. Like, so those types of conferences, they'd have people from like not just selling tech, but even selling like engineering products and materials, that were sort of just like coming to the market that people would just want to get familiar with. So no, unfortunately, I don't have as much insight into like solely tech conferences.
No, that's fair. I mean, listen, I can name all the conferences. If you're in DevRel, go to DevRelCon. It's a fantastic event. If you're a student, go to HackCon. MLH HackCon is fantastic. If you're a developer living in Europe, go to We Are Developers. Absolutely fantastic. If you're into the Kubernetes space, go to any of the CNCF events, either the co-located or the Kubernetes specific ones. If you get the chance to go to like Jonathan was talking about the Datadog conference, these like vendor conferences where they're inviting like customers of like a specific platform to kind of come in. I think it's very cool because they do things that you would never see, because a lot of those conferences are trying to they're trying to really like re-up their clients for the next year. So there'll be really cool things. Like I went to the New Relic Future Stack conference in 2022, and they had Steve Wozniak as one of the keynotes. And it was just like, really? Like, and he was like the final day keynote too. So it was just, it was amazing. And then the only other one that I would say that pops off top of my head would be that conference. I think it's a great polyglot conference. That is just like, if you're looking to get involved in some sort of a conference, like that's a very good one to go to. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was curious if anyone was interested in being a speaker at any conferences, and if so, what kind of talk would you give as a speaker? Or if you have already spoken at a conference before, what kind of talk would you give differently now that you have experience talking at one?
Oh man, Richard with the great questions. All right, I'm not going to talk for this one because I definitely speak at conferences, but yeah, Anthony, Andrew, Jonathan, if you were going to do a talk, what would you want to give a talk on?
I'm trying to recollect because I feel like we've submitted like at least a dozen or so talk applications in the last year on a pretty wide variety of topics. I think from my perspective, sharing the sort of two talks we did that I submitted for SaaS Open, and one of which I did was, one around sort of more CEO specific around sort of thoughts around, when and how to leverage venture debt as part of your financing strategy. And the other one was more sort of product focused around sort of what led us to the decision to make the pivot from Tapalytics to DEVCYCLE over the last couple of years, and sort of what are what were the learnings from that, both like good and bad, and how would we do it differently next time, or not that we're planning to pivot again, but sort of learnings for others. So those were sort of the two ones that were most interesting off the top of my mind. I'm sure Jonathan has more sort of like technology focused topics to share.
Yeah, I've given a couple talks before. Yeah, we've applied to some of the bigger conferences for larger talks around a lot of the stuff we do, which is like feature flagging. I'm on the board of like the Open Feature, which is a open source feature flagging sort of project. So I've sort of applied to give some talks around that as well. But yeah, getting into some of these very very large conferences, like where tens of thousands of people go, is a big challenge. I think you need to be you need to have the name brand or the backing of a big company or something like that to really get access to those ones. And so a lot of smaller, more local conferences and ones where maybe the people sort of organizing it are likely ways to get initial talks sort of accepted and get some experience behind doing those types of talks.
Yeah, I like it. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh yeah, I just want to say thank you for the answers. Yeah, that was very insightful. Because I only asked because I am kind of interested in speaking at a conference. I don't know what the talk will be about, honestly. I got some great advice on like how I should approach conference talks and like what I should think about going into or creating one and submitting a CFP. But yeah, thank you for the answers.
I can speak on this too, Richard. One of the things that I noticed, at least not just from this conference at LeadDev, but just like all the other conferences we've been to, people love talks where you're telling people stories, especially if it's like a lessons learned story. One of the talks from LeadDev is actually by a senior engineering manager. Her name was Melissa. She works at Medium, and she was talking about from her own experience. She told a little bit of a story of like when to be scrappy and when to be of like the scale mindset. Like depending on like where the company is at, or if it's a startup. And yeah, just hearing stories like that from personal experience, like really resonates with a lot of people. So if you're thinking of giving a talk and you're curious about what to talk about, I would definitely on what's sort of been like a pivotal experience in your professional life that you think people could learn from.
Yeah, definitely. I think something I've been thinking about is talking about overcoming fears and how that encompasses the developer journey, because I feel like a lot of my journey has been overcoming fears of mine, and I hope to continue to overcome a lot of those fears. But I think aspiring developers and people who are transitioning into tech have to overcome a lot of fears that can be uncomfortable for a very introverted focused community. Like, for example, taking the initiative to speak in tech Twitter space, or like this one, or reaching out to people for coffee chats, or just taking an initiative on a project. Like, hey, I'd like to work on this ticket. What do I need to do? I have some questions. Stuff like that.
I'm so glad you said that, because there was actually a segment in the conference where people were talking about how they deal with anxiety when it comes to putting code out there for review, like putting up a PR and the fears that come with that. What I would say towards anything like that, any feelings related to something like that, is that you're definitely not alone. Like, people attended and then wanted to hear what the speaker was talking about. Her name is Carol Lee. She works at the Developer Success Hub. But yeah, if you're feeling something like that, you're definitely not alone. And people want to hear that. It actually reassures them that they're not alone as well. So
that's great to hear. Thank you so much for the feedback. I actually have to drop off. I have a meeting in like 10 minutes, but it was great to be on this thing.
Thanks for being here, Richard.
Yeah, thank you for hosting. I hope you guys have a great rest of the space, and
Awesome.
I would love to talk to you guys more.
Yeah.
Talk to you guys later.
Yeah, we'll see you later. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Richard.
Oh, hey, yeah, I think one of the topics I would do, now that I've learned this pretty well, is React 3 Fiber things, like animations and stuff. Probably something smaller, like that conference is big, but it's not like what y'all said, like 5,000. I think it's 1,000. I know this year was less. Probably render. I guess it would be pretty hard to get into render, be a speaker. I guess it depends.
Yeah. I mean, I feel with all these conferences, right? Like once you get a name, it's a lot easier to get accepted to these things. But then you gotta kind of struggle through. And even this, right? Like doing spaces and things like this is always really interesting, because somebody said to me recently, is like, if you do a space or a stream or something like that, and nobody shows up and you're just kind of talking to yourself, you kind of get discouraged. But if like 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, 30 people showed up in your living room and just sat there and like wanted to have a conversation with you, or like listen to something you had to say, you would be like over the moon. And so I think we get this like expectation that these all these things that we do in kind of the online world need to be big, but sometimes smaller is better for like practicing and figuring out some of these things, so you can become that really well-known face out there that's getting on the conference circuit. But yeah, absolutely. I think big conferences are great, but thanks for sharing that, Chris. That was awesome.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. That was a good answer.
So I think we're gonna kind of wrap things up here in just a minute. But I'd like to kind of go back to Jonathan, Andrew, and Anthony. Kind of biggest takeaway from each of your respective conferences in New York last week. Whoever wants to jump on, go nuts. Anthony, you're first. You unmuted first.
For me, honestly, it was just, if I'm speaking very honestly here, it's the fact that getting visibility in all the problems that the industry is dealing with, and just realizing how common it is, like across the board, regardless of what industry or sorry, like a client or customer you're serving. It seems like everybody was talking about things that that we chat about internally at our company, which is really, really cool.
Love that. All right, Andrew, you unmuted second. What do you got?
Yeah, you know, there's some interesting strategy, especially around sort of like how to accelerate finding, you know, is a project worth actually investing a lot of time and effort in? Around using sort of like the 5x5x5 framework, which I hadn't heard about before, but was interesting. But probably the most resonant for me was like, you know, given what we are and who we are as a company, one of the talks was like the year of experiments, where literally no day could go by without a new experiment being created at one of the her name was IE, the CEO of Boomerang. It was a very inspirational talk of sort of like they're completely bootstrapped, but how do they get to hyper growth without, you know, getting a ton of VC funding? The way that they did it was basically did nothing but run experiments on everything from like their initial conversion page to their checkout to the like even like the churn funnel of like if someone wants to churn, how do you convince them not to? And that sort of year of experimentation, sort of how they went about it, was you know, really well done talk and really interesting.
Love that. All right,
Yeah.
Jonathan, finishing it off.
Yeah, mine was at figures. There's a lot of engineering leaders, and I think everyone realizes with sort of the downturn a bit in the tech economy. Yeah, a lot of engineering leaders have been having challenges recently. So hearing a lot of similar stories of how to lead sort of smaller engineering teams and how to motivate folks and how to make sure that engineering teams are building things that sort of the business needs. And I spent a lot of time talking to sort of leaders who are still sort of actively coding, actively involved in stuff they're building and talking about sort of like AI coding tools and sort of a lot of people falling in love with things like Cursor AI and things like that to really help power and improve the speed at which they're sort of delivering software for their companies. And so a lot of those conversations were pretty fascinating.
Love that. And yeah, Chris, go ahead.
I didn't have anything.
Oh, sorry. I just saw your hand up. Amazing.
I think you muted yourself, Andrew, in excitement.
I love that I muted myself in excitement. It's not the worst thing that has happened to me. So I think with that, we're going to call it to our space today. But if you are checking this out or you've just dropped in, you can check out the whole recording. It's going to be here and available, and we'll share it out on a tweet just after this. But for everybody who came on and joined and spoke, so Chris, huge thank you to you. Richard, huge thank you. And to everybody else who joined us on the space, thank you so much for being here. And Jonathan, Andrew, and Anthony, thank you so much for not only going to a conference, but then also agreeing to come on and talk about your experience at the conference and try and remember it all a week later. So with that, I think we're going to call it for today. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya.